Okay. So today on Office Hours, we are going to talk about SHRM's most recent Workplace and Culture Report. Every year, SHRM comes out, and SHRM stands for Society of Human Resource Management. It is considered an industry trade organization for HR professionals. And so they do a global workplace survey where they look at what is happening in workplace culture around the world. So while we know about what's happening in specific countries, it does vary. And it's a very interesting survey because it has, or should I say report, because it surveys a variety of countries and organizations. And so you can see the differences by country. You can see the elements that across the globe are the key drivers. And it allows for you to see where certain organizations, or should I say certain countries and certain markets, are doing better in certain of those KPIs that we're looking at. So today we're going to just go over it broadly. I'm going to spend a little bit of time in certain areas more than others. If there are any particular questions or anything, please be sure to put it in the chat or send a DM later, and I will happily go over it. So let's start with the report. Okay, here we go. What I think is really interesting is that we think about workplace culture, and it is very much specific to the local culture of the country. Here are the kind of findings, the key findings, and we're going to walk through some of these. So, when they did this survey, they essentially asked what were the broadly shared values, attitudes, behaviors, and norms of a company. And globally speaking, what were the favorable cultures? And they looked at five key elements, the things that they found to be the threads that are great hallmarks for great workplace culture. And so, first and foremost was honest and unbiased management. Second, civil behavior. Third, meaningful work and opportunities. Fourth, open communication and empathy. When you look at this, it's a really great place to start because a lot of these are hallmarks of not only engagement, team dynamics, also as it relates to retention and people feeling what they do matters. So I think these are really great to start with. What they found was that 57% of those who rate their organizational culture poorly say they are actively or soon looking for another job. So workplace culture ties very closely to retention, attrition, whether people are looking for a job or not. And so, if you are in an organization where you have positive culture, it's four times more likely that you're going to stay. So, when people talk about why people leave, it's not always money, it's not always the commute, things like that. It's the organizational culture. This is what they essentially come to know as the behaviors, attitudes, values, the norms of a company. And so that is what is driving a lot of this. When they are looking at ratings of organizational culture, it varies by country. As we know this, different countries have different cultures, like as in the culture of the country. And so the organization is a macro, excuse me, the country is a macro, the organization is a micro version of that. And so when you look at companies in India versus companies in France or other parts of the world, African countries, you're going to see different things. So I'm excited to dig into that a little bit. What they have also found out is that in addition to inadequate pay, the top reasons people leave among those are terrible and poor workplace cultures. And with that, it includes poor management, unfair treatment, insufficient regard to well being, and lack of empathetic leadership. So, we're going to hear a lot more about empathetic leadership because I feel as though through COVID, we as a world, that was a global pandemic, that was a global event. Everyone experienced different things in the pandemic, of course, how your country responded to it what type of work you were doing at the time. Were you an essential worker or not? All of those things factored in. But I believe that we had a rare opportunity to see how an organization functions when under duress or when under stress. And that's oftentimes very indicative of your workplace culture. When things are going great, when we're all having profitable years, nobody kind of sometimes thinks about it. But when things go off the rails and it isn't something that you can predict, in the case of COVID, how did your organization respond? How much compassion and empathy was shown? Were you feeling like you were treated fair? All of those types of things, I think, came to light. And I think we're still, I wouldn't say recovering, but it's a situation where that is still very top of mind for a lot of people. And as a result, something that they look at when they're looking at organizations. Globally, workers who choose to remain in what they call toxic work cultures tend to do so out of fear. So, fear of losing their job, fear of losing their benefits. And so, a fear based model, which I mean, I feel like I could do a whole talk on fear based models. When people are doing something out of fear, it essentially is inciting a scarcity mindset. So I feel like so much of what's happening right now with toxic work cultures and people talking about toxic work cultures, it's really indicative of, again, of the macro culture around you. And if you're living in a fear-based, I don't want to say just economy, but a geopolitical climate, and I feel like there's a lot of fear happening right now, it's not surprising that this is seeping into our work cultures and people are feeling very scared to make moves and do things because they don't want to lose what they have instead of thinking about what's possibly available to them. Executives are significantly more likely to perceive their organization culture favorably versus individual contributors. And this is a trend across geographic areas. I am totally not surprised by this because I think leadership always takes a 30,000-foot view. Also, work is for them oftentimes looking at steering the direction of an organization, looking at the ways to make money, whereas the individual contributor is the person actually doing the work and oftentimes the person who is trying to figure out how to make the organization work best for them and sometimes don't have the power and the authority and the command to even do some of that. So I'm not surprised about that. Employee burnout affects more than a quarter of employees globally and is more prevalent in younger workers and ones who are establishing themselves within an organization, those who have worked at their organization for up to 5 years. So basically, if you've been in corporate or in an organization for 5 years, you have a higher chance of experiencing burnout. And oftentimes it is why people are looking for a new job. And it is over 3 times greater than the number of engaged employees who show little sign of burnout. Wow. So this is quite interesting and quite telling. I feel as though this report is really giving you a good sense of how organizations have rated themselves. Apparently, at least 56% are feeling very good or excellent, but then a little less than half are not necessarily as good. I find that because it's a third party survey, I'm hoping that people weren't coerced in some way to respond and they're feeling like they can respond honestly. Because I think that, as we'll see when you go by country, you're going to see different things. So let's look at the countries. So, oddly enough, the countries at the top where they say they have great organizational culture: India, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. These are all, I say, countries where either UAE, they have a very strong economy as it relates to oil. And I also feel as a country, just from what I am aware of, it seems like a very rich country to begin with. So people are fairly happy with the culture there. Egypt as well, India. Wow. It's Indonesia, United States, Mexico, Singapore, Australia, Malaysia, Germany, Canada, Austria, UK, China, Brazil, South Korea, France, and Japan. Wow, I'm surprised to see Japan. at the bottom. But you know what? If people are honest, and honesty is a big part of participation, then that's actually, it is what it is. It seems if you look at the country where people said they weren't terribly excited, poor, Australia was high, so is UK. So it's very interesting in terms of how this is coming together. So they define these key drivers, and we, I think, all know what honest and unbiased management looks like. It's your ability to see whether bad behavior is tolerated and that management actually lives by the set of standards. This is what I call walk the talk. Are you actually doing what you say you're doing? Your mission, vision, values, all of those things are parts of your culture. And so if you're not living by them and actually carrying them out, people don't feel like they are genuine, honest, and they feel biased when they see that different people get different behavior, especially when management comes and says, this is how we're going to handle a situation. Civil behavior. So this really is about microaggressions, how people are dealt with when they make a mistake. It can do with how people feel like they're treated in the organization. Is there respect? Is there a sense of safety, psychological safety, all of those types of things, civil behavior, meaningful work and opportunities. This is very interesting because the research that I know about meaningful work is that it really comes down to the employee feeling that the work that they're doing is meaningful. There's an example that's often given of a janitor, and they're working in a hospital, and one janitor, their mindset about the work they're doing is very much, it doesn't matter. I'm just here cleaning the floors and wiping things down. And another person is, I'm working at an amazing place where I get to provide this service for patients and doctors, and I feel like I'm a valuable part of this staff. And the thing with meaningful work is it is whether you're creating a culture where someone feels like that, how you're talking to them, how you're treating them. And so I do believe that a positive work culture is huge when it comes to feeling like the work that you're doing is meaningful. Open communication. So this one's interesting because I feel like depending on the country and the culture of the country, candid and honest conversations will vary. What I know is what we say and what we do and how we say it are all very important. And what I see when this comes up is, do people feel like they can tell you the truth and that there's a sense of trust that's there in being able to tell the truth? Because people can't improve or people can't do better or can't know what they need to be focused on if they aren't getting honest communication. Empathy. So I believe so much in where we're going as a society, as a country, as a culture. When you see empathy as something that is considered a key driver in a workplace, because I honestly believe that for the longest time, this was never a word you would find at a SHRM report, or you would even hear anything called empathetic leadership. This is, to me, the future of where we're going as leaders. If you are not able to feel, understand another person's experience from their frame of reference, if you are not able to put yourself in their shoes, as they say, and safely express honest, open communication around, I'm so sorry something happened to you, or, oh, I wasn't aware this was going on. How can we accommodate for this? If you're not able to see that we are not robots and we are not machines and we do have feelings and there are circumstances that people are going through outside of work that impact how they show up at work, if you are not able to do that, you are going to have a lot of turnover on your team and you will, I think, be considered a manager that just does not seem to connect and value connection with your staff and your team members. So this is huge. And I feel like this is, if anything, the skill that is often the hardest to learn. If you are not practicing it in your personal life, if you're not practicing it in general, and with 75% of leadership being male dominated, often find that having someone cry at work is still considered a taboo thing. This, in my opinion, is if we can master some of this as well as open communication, we might be able to get the rest of this under control. Just my opinion. So here are the factors. You can go over this. What I think is very telling here, though, is which countries things were the strongest in. So honest and unbiased management is strongest in Asian countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Japan. Civil behavior is stronger in European and North American countries, Mexico, Germany, and Canada. Developing markets such as Indonesia, Egypt, Brazil, India are likely to rate meaningful work opportunities and opportunities higher. And then open communication tends to be stronger in some European countries alongside India and Australia. And then empathy tends to have stronger assessments in the same countries where management gets more positive rating. So the same place where unbiased and honest management is some of the places where they had the strongest ratings for empathy: China, Indonesia, and Malaysia, and Brazil making an appearance at the top 5. So I honestly am not surprised that empathy is so tied into that, because if your manager doesn't understand you and doesn't make an effort to put themselves in your shoes, that's not an honest relationship. That's not an honest, unbiased relationship. So that's actually very interesting to see. This is actually very interesting to see. What I'm realizing now is that there are no African countries here. And I'm very curious why SHRM did not include the continent in its survey. I know there are a variety of businesses within Kenya, Ghana, South Africa. They did Egypt, which is North Africa, but I find it interesting that they did not take the time to look at other countries in Africa. That's a little, I don't want to say biased, but a little biased, if I say so myself. So, why culture matters? I think we know this. Culture is really what sets your organization apart. It's a competitive advantage. It's, again, your secret sauce, so to speak. And I find it interesting that what they're doing in this is that they're looking at it in order to determine why certain maybe organizations are more successful and how much culture has to do with that. So, culture key to retention with stronger impact in certain countries. So, this is the percentage of employees who are actively searching for a new job by culture rating. So, if you look at if they have a terrible rating or a poor or terrible rating, and then good and excellent, if you're looking at how many of them are actively looking for a job, I find that we already know this to be true. If the culture isn't very good, yes, you'll see a higher amount of people looking. I'm not surprised by this at all. Top reasons employees stay or leave globally. So we know this, and it's interesting to see that this is also the case across the world. If you have a poor manager, that's 54%. Unfair culture, or excuse me, unfair treatment, inadequate pay, lack of empathy, insufficient regard for employee well-being. So these are the top reasons in terrible cultures. So all the countries that had terrible cultures and they asked them why, what was terrible, these were the things that they said. And in excellent cultures, or good to excellent cultures, the reasons for them leaving: interesting pay, not enough opportunities for growth and mobility, not enough opportunities for learning, professional development, inadequate benefits, and lack of work flexibility. So basically, when you're in a good culture, the things that didn't come up here, I feel are being met. So you feel like it's a good culture because you probably have all of these things. So now the things that matter to you, are you getting paid adequately? Do you feel as though there's opportunities for growth? Do you feel like you're learning, what I call the learning and earning factor? And if your benefits are sufficient for you, and at some point, workplace flexibility becomes important. I think people want a little bit more freedom from time to time. Top reasons for seeking to stay. So, in terrible cultures, and I am not surprised by this, we talked about this fear based, scarcity based mentality. So, why you're saying job security, basically, you're staying for a paycheck. And we see this a lot, people who are there because they need money, they need to have a job. I don't want to risk leaving during a possible recession, probably ability to find another job, or don't want to risk leaving and not knowing what you're going to get into. Competitive pay, meaning you're not sure you're going to make the same amount of money or at least be able to compete. Workplace flexibility, and then benefits. So interesting. And what are the things that matter when you're in a good or excellent culture? So, fair treatment, that is at the top. People like being treated fairly, and they don't know whether if they go somewhere else, they'll get that same treatment. Job security, so that's still, of course, important. Good organizational culture. So they love the culture there and they aren't sure they're going to be able to find it somewhere else. A good manager, that means they like their manager. And then workplace flexibility, which means they have enough of it that they feel as though if they go somewhere else, they won't have it. This is very telling. I feel, again, we're looking at scarcity mentality here and we're looking at abundance and how we can do more, and what we're getting with what we already have and wanting more of it. And even looking at the percentages, 50 to 55% versus 16 to 47, the stagger on that is wild. This is very interesting. Executives more likely to rate their cultures as good. So people at the top think everything's great. We think we're great. We also have to project greatness when we're in the C-suite because we have to report to shareholders and we have to steer the ship and make it sound like everything's wonderful. But it's interesting that when you get down to individual contributor and even up to manager is still fairly strong, people start to still want to say everything's awesome. I have found that management has to always project success in order not only to not, again, this is part of the honest communication, in order to not make it so that the individual contributor and the lower managers feel like what they're doing doesn't matter. And so you always feel like you're having to say everything's good and we just need to keep going and press. This is fairly interesting. This is job level. Culture perception varies across countries. So depending on the country, this is very interesting as well. I'm not going to spend too much time here. Let's talk about burnout and engagement because I feel like you can't talk about that without getting into the generational bias. And this is actually, for me, the part that seems very interesting. Older generations are more engaged. When you look at boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, it looks like the people who actually are more interested in their job and still show up with that same fervor. You would think it would be the younger generation because they've got more energy. They have maybe a longer runway in front of them. And so they're like putting their head in the game. But that is not true. I will spend a moment here because I have been seeing this trend at least for the past 3 or 4 years. As a adjunct professor at a university, I am probably more involved with Gen Z than I would ever be if I weren't a professor because I see how they approach school. And I feel like that is a very good indicator in terms of how they will approach work. There is not this sense of commitment. I am not saying they don't have an interest in learning. I am not saying that they don't have an interest in being present. What I'm saying is school is one of the many things that they're doing. They also have so many interests outside. They have access to technology that I don't think was available 50 years ago. And so they're definitely aware that there are many ways in which they can be engaged and in many ways in which they can make money. The amount of students that I have come across that are making money while they're going to school and not as in doing a student job on campus, but like making money by selling things online, I think would surprise so many boomers because this wasn't even a technology available to them when they were initially starting to work. And so the idea that there's more than one way to make money is still, I think, a foreign concept. What I tell managers who are going to manage Gen Z is that meaningful work component is huge for that group. You really need to make sure that you have them doing work that means something to them, because the minute they check out or they become disengaged, do understand this 41%, they're on autopilot at that point. And if they're burnt out, which is this one, they become, I don't want to say little cancers in your organization, but, and that's across the board with any group that becomes burned out. I find that it's interesting that it's between 30, 31, 32% of the burnout across these three generations. And even here, it's maybe 41 to 34. Again, 49%, that is crazy. That is so many, like more than almost half of the people are like showing up to work with some sense of entitlement. I also would imagine that these are also the people that make up the leadership, the executive leadership. And so, yeah, you have to show up because you're running the company. This is huge. I think that we need to talk a lot more about this in general, because this allows me to realize when you're talking to people and you realize they're not really here, or they are, or they're tired. And that's what engaged, disengaged, and burned out really means. So when we're looking at this across generations, and then also we add gender to it, and then we add country, this really gets interesting. So women rate culture more favorably than men. The percentage of employees who rate their culture as good or excellent by country and gender. India, it looks like there's just a high amount of women that are working. And it's funny, UAE, it's almost neck and neck there in terms of men and women on this spectrum. So it looks as though in countries where there is, feels like emerging markets of sorts, Egypt, China, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, India, Canada, Singapore, Mexico, Austria, like women are either in more leadership roles, I would even guess, or have more access to work opportunities that maybe they didn't in the past. And then this one, I would be curious to see how much of this has to do with men in leadership roles, meaning they are taking more men in leadership roles in these types of environments. This is a very interesting study. I would encourage you to go and see what this means within your own organization, especially if you have global locations. There are so many organizations out here that I believe maybe don't even think about themselves in that way, or you are considering yourself just in your one geographic location. And maybe it's interesting to see what comparison may look like within the particular region that you're in within the world. But I do love this survey and this report, I should say, because it splices things a lot of different ways. I enjoy qualitative people data. It's, I think, my inner sociologist, anthropologist, education nerd part of me that just enjoys looking at asking people questions, getting a sense of what they say, looking at how that shows up in terms of behaviors in the workplace, and seeing if there's any trends or patterns over time, over generation, over gender, over race, over country. This is like when I used to do engagement surveys, I would love to splice it so many ways, looking at tenure, looking at individual contributor versus management, middle management versus executive, because you get to see the different thought patterns that you may not even be aware of exists. And I think we always look for the big group, the big clump that shows confirmation bias of that we have around this is why. But what's really I think even more interesting to look at is the intersections and to see the margins, because when you see that the margins aren't being served within the survey data, to me, those are canaries in coal mines of sorts, because when you serve the most marginalized or the people who are on the smaller side of something, you actually, when they are satisfied, you usually satisfy everyone else when it comes to certain parts of your business. So if you haven't done an engagement survey lately, or you haven't looked at this stuff, that is definitely something that I offer and enjoy doing. And if you are interested in doing something like this in your organization in order to get a sense of your workplace culture and what your workplace culture is doing well, please reach out to me, garlandfuller.com. I have a third space, of course, assessment that I do specifically if you're looking to bring things in. However, I also have done a variety of engagement surveys and focus groups for when we're trying to audit and just take stock of where we are. It's nice to get initiatives going and to say, we're going to try to do different things. But if you haven't taken an audit or an assessment of where you are now, or looked at where you are now versus maybe where you were 5 years ago, I think this is a really great time to do that, because it's never too late to decide to change something. And your workplace culture, I feel like right now, more than anything, especially with artificial intelligence looming, if you aren't sure why your people are showing up, what makes them engaged, and you're only thinking about how AI is going to come and take over and do people's jobs, it's not helping your organization by thinking about how you're going to eliminate people instead of thinking about how you can reskill, upskill, cross pollinate various organizations, skill sets, possible business development offerings, because people have a lot of talents and gifts that you may not be aware of because they are not using it in their day job right now. So I just want to thank you for getting this far and listening. And if there's any ideas that you have, let me know. Wouldn't be right if I didn't say follow me on Instagram, follow me on LinkedIn, follow me on Facebook, and listen to my podcast, Reimagining Community. Thank you so much. Bye.